Section 16 of the Public Orations of Demosthenes. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Public Orations of Demosthenes, translated by Arthur Wallace Pickard, on the Embassy, Part 6. I wish now to reckon up from the beginning the charges which I have made, in order to show you that I have done all that I undertook to do at the beginning of my speech. I have proved that there was no truth in his report, that, on the contrary, he deceived you by the evidence not of words but of the actual course of events. I have proved that he was the cause of your unwillingness to hear the truth from my mouth, captivated as you were at the time by his promises and undertakings, that he gave you advice which was the exact opposite of that which he ought to have given, opposing the peace which was suggested by the allies, and advocating the peace of Philocrates, that he wasted time in order that you might not be able to march to the aid of the Phocians, even if you wished to do so, and that he has done many atrocious deeds during his absence from home. For he has betrayed and sold everything, he has taken bribes, and has left no form of rascality untried. These are the points which I promised at the outset to prove, and I have proved them. Observe then what follows, for what I have now to say to you has already become a simple matter. You have sworn that you will vote according to the laws and the decrees of the people and the Council of 500. The defendant is proved, in all his conduct as ambassador, to have acted in contravention of the laws, of the decrees, and of justice. He ought therefore to be convicted in any court composed of rational men, even if there were no other crimes at his door. 2 of his actions are sufficient to slay him, for he betrayed to Philip not only the Phocians, but also Thrace. 2 places in the whole world of greater value to Athens than Thermopylae on land and the Hellespont over sea could not possibly be found, and both these places these men have shamefully sold and placed in Philip's hands to be used against you. The enormity of this crime alone, the sacrifice of Thrace and the walls, apart from all the rest, might be proved in countless ways, and it is easy to point out how many men have been executed or fined vast sums of money by you for such offences. Ergophilus, Cephisodotus, Timomachus, Ergocles long ago, Dionysius, and others, all of whom together, I may almost say, have done the city less harm than the defendant. But in those days, men of Athens, you still guarded against danger by calculation and forethought, whereas now you overlook any danger which does not annoy you from day to day, or cause you pain by its immediate presence, and then pass such resolutions here as that Philip shall take the oath in favour of Sir Sobleptes also, that we will not take part in the proceedings of the Amphictyons, that we must amend the peace. But none of these resolutions would have been required had Aeschines then been ready to sail and to do what was required. As it is, by urging us to go by land, he has lost all that we could have saved by sailing, and by lying, all that could have been saved by speaking the truth. He intends, I am told, to express immediately his indignation that he alone of all the speakers in the assembly should have to render an account of his words. I will not urge that all speakers would reasonably be called upon to render such an account, if any of their words were spoken for money. I only say this: if Aeschines in his private capacity has spoken widely on some occasion, or committed some blunder, do not be over strict with him, but let it pass and grant him pardon. But if, as your ambassador, he has deliberately deceived you for money, Then do not let him go, or tolerate the plea that he ought not to be called to account for what he said. Why, for what, if not for his words, is an ambassador to be brought to justice? Ambassadors have no control over ships or places or soldiers or citadels. No one puts such things in their hands, but over words and times. As regards times, if he did not cause the times of the city's opportunities to be lost, he is not guilty. But if he did so, he has committed crime. And as to his words, if the words of his report were true or expedient, let him escape. But if they were at once false, venal, and disastrous, let him be convicted. No greater wrong can a man do you than is done by lying speeches. For where government is based upon speeches, how can it be carried on in security if the speeches are not true? And if, in particular, a speaker takes bribes and speaks to further the interests of the enemy, how can you escape real danger? For to rob you of your opportunities is not the same thing as to rob an oligarchy or a tyrant. Far from it. Under such governments, I imagine, everything is done promptly at a word of command. But with you the council must first hear about everything and pass its preliminary resolution, and even that not at any time, but only when notice has been given of the reception of heralds and embassies. Then you must convoke an assembly, and that only when the time comes for one, as ordained by law. Then those who speak for your true good have to master and overcome those who, through ignorance or wickedness, oppose them. Besides all this, even when a measure is resolved upon, and its advantages are already plain, time must be granted to the impecuniosity of the majority, in which they may procure whatever means they require in order to be able to carry out what has been resolved. And so, he who causes time so critical to be lost, in a state constituted as ours is, has not caused you to lose times, but has robbed you absolutely of the realization of your aims. Now all those who are anxious to deceive you are very ready with such expressions as disturbers of the city, men who prevent Philip from conferring benefits on the city. In reply to these, I will use no argument, but will read you Philip's letters, and will remind you of the occasion on which each piece of deception took place, that you may know that Philip has got beyond this exaggerated title of benefactor of which we are so sickened, in his attempts to take you in by it. Philip's letters are read. Now, although his work as ambassador has been so shameful, so detrimental to you in many, nay, in all points, he goes about asking people what they think of Demosthenes, who prosecuted his own colleagues. I prosecute you indeed, whether I would or no, because throughout our entire absence from home you plotted against me, as I have said, and because now I have the choice of only two alternatives. Either I must appear to share with you the responsibility for such work as yours, or I must prosecute you. Nay, I deny that I was ever your colleague in the embassy. I say that your work as ambassador was an atrocious work, while my own was for the true good of those present here. It is Philocrates that has been your colleague, as you have been his, and Phrynon, for your policy was the same as theirs, and you all approved of the same objects. But where are the salt, the table, the libations that we shared? So he asks everywhere in his theatrical style, as though it were not the criminals but the upright that were false to such pledges. I am certain that though all the Britons offer their common sacrifice on each occasion, and join one with another in their meal and their libation, the good do not on this account copy the bad. But if they detect one of their own number in crime, they report the fact to the council and the people. In the very same way, the council offers its inaugural sacrifice and feasts together, and joins in libations and sacred rites. So do the generals, and one may practically say every body of magistrates. Does that mean that they grant an indemnity to any of their number who is guilty of crime? Very far from it. Leon accuses Timagoras after being his fellow ambassador for 4 years. Eubulus accuses Thyrex and Smythus after sharing the banquet with them. The great Conon the elder prosecuted Adimantus, though they were generals together. Which sinned against the salt and the libation? Aeschines, the traitors and the faithless ambassadors and the hirelings, or their accusers? Plainly those who violated, as you have done, the sanctity, not of private libations, but of libations poured in the name of the whole country. That you may realize that these men have been the most worthless and wicked, not only for all who have ever gone to Philip in a public capacity, but even of those who have gone as private persons, and indeed of all mankind, I ask you to listen to me while I describe briefly an incident which falls outside the story of this embassy. When Philip took Olynthus, he celebrated Olympian games and gathered together all the artists to the sacrifice and the festal gathering. And while he was entertaining them at a banquet and crowning the victors, he asked Satyrus, the well-known comic actor, why he alone requested no favour of him. Did he see any meanness in him or any dislike towards himself? Satyrus answered, so the story goes, that he happened to stand in no need of the things for which the rest were asking, but that the boon which he would like to ask was a favour which it would be very easy indeed for Philip to bestow. Only he was afraid that he might fail to obtain it. Philip bade him name his request, declaring with some spirit that there was nothing that he would not do for him. Satyrus is then said to have stated that Apollophanes of Pydna was formerly his friend and guest friend, and that when he had perished by a treacherous assassination, his kinsman had, in alarm, conveyed his daughters, then little children, to Olynthus secretly. These girls, said Satyrus, have been taken prisoners at the capture of the city. They are with you, and they are now of marriageable age. It is these girls that I beg and entreat you to give to me. But I should like you to hear and understand what sort of present you will be giving me, if you really give it. I shall gain nothing by receiving it. I shall give them in marriage, and a dowry with them, and shall not allow them to suffer anything unworthy of us or of their father. When those who were present at the feast heard this, there was such applause and cheering and approbation on all hands, that Philip was moved and granted the request, although the Apollophanes who was spoken of was one of the murderers of Alexander, Philip's brother. Now let us examine side by side with this banquet of Satyrus that in which these men took part in Macedonia. Observe what likeness and resemblance there is between the two. For these men were invited to the house of Xenophron, the son of Pledimus, who was one of the 30, and went. I did not go. But when it came to the time for wine, he brought in an Olynthian woman, good-looking, but well-bred and modest, as the event proved. At first, I believe, according to the account which Iatrocles gave me the next day, they only forced her to drink a little wine quietly and to eat some dessert. But as the feast proceeded and they waxed warm, they bade her recline and even sing a song. And when the poor creature, who was in great distress, neither would nor could do as they bade her, Aeschines and Phrynon declared that it was an insult and quite intolerable that a captive woman, one of those God-forsaken devils the Olynthians, should give herself airs. Call a slave, they cried, and let someone bring a strap." A servant came with a lash. They had been drinking, I imagine, and were easily annoyed, and as soon as she said something and burst into tears, the servant tore open her dress and gave her a number of cuts across the back. Beside herself with the pain and the sense of her position, the woman leaped up and fell before the knees of Patroclus, overturning the table as she did so, and had he not rescued her, she would have perished as the victim of a drunken debauch, for the drunkenness of this abominable creature is something horrible. The case of this woman was also mentioned in Arcadia before the 10,000, and Diophantus reported to you what I shall now force him to testify, for the matter was much talked of in Thessaly and everywhere. Yet, with all this on his conscience, this unclean creature will dare to look you in the face, and will very soon be speaking to you of the life he has lived, in that magnificent voice of his. It chokes me to hear him. Does not the jury know how at first you used to read over the books to your mother at her initiations, and wallow amid bands of drunken men at their orgies while still a boy? And how you were afterwards under clerk to the magistrates and played the rogue for 2 or 3 drachmae? And how at last, in recent days, you thought yourself lucky to get a parasitic living in the training rooms of others as a third-rate actor? What then is the life of which you propose to speak? Where have you lived it? For the life which you have really lived has been what I have described. And how much does he take upon himself? He brought another man to trial here for unnatural offences. But I leave this point for the moment. To the clerk. First read me these depositions. The depositions are read. So many then, and so gross, gentlemen of the jury, being the crimes against you of which he stands convicted, and what wickedness do they not include? He is corrupt, he is a minion, he is under the curse, a liar, a betrayer of his own people. All the most heinous offences are there. He will not defend himself against a single of these charges, and will have no defence to offer that is either just or straightforward. But the statement which I am told he intends to make borders on madness, though perhaps a man who has no other plea to offer must contrive anything that he can. For I hear that he is to say that I, forsooth, have been a partner in everything of which I accuse him, that at first I used to approve of his policy and to act with him, and that I have suddenly changed my mind and become his accuser. As a defence of his conduct, such assertions are, of course, neither legitimate nor to the point, though they do imply some kind of charge against myself. For, of course, if I have acted thus, I am a worthless person. But the conduct itself is no better for that. Far from it. At the same time, I think it is proper for me to prove to you both the points in question. First, that if he makes such an assertion, he will be lying, and secondly, what is the just line of defence. Now, a just and straightforward defence must show either that the acts charged against him were not committed, or that, having been committed, they are to the advantage of the city. But Aeschines cannot do either of these things. For I presume that it is not possible for him to say that it is to the advantage of the city that the Phocians have been ruined, that Thermopylae is in Philip's hands, that Thebes is powerful, that there are soldiers in Euboea and plotting against Megara, and that the peace should not have been sworn to, when on the former occasion he announced the very contrary of all these things to you in the guise of advantages, and advantages about to be realized. Nor will he be able to persuade you that these things have not been done, when you yourselves have seen them and know the facts well. It remains for me, therefore, to show you that I have had no share in any of their proceedings. Shall I then dismiss everything else from consideration, all that I have said against them in your presence, all my collisions with them during our absence, all my antagonism to them from first to last, and produce my opponents themselves as witnesses to the fact that my conduct and theirs have been absolutely contrary the one to the other, that they have taken money to your detriment, and that I refuse to receive it? Then mark what I say. Who, would you say, was of all men in Athens the most offensive, most overflowing with effrontery and contemptuousness? I am sure that none of you, even by mistake, would name any other than Philocrates. And who, would you say, possessed the loudest voice, and could enunciate whatever he pleased most clearly? Aeschines the defendant, I am sure. Who is it then that these men describe as cowardly and timid before a crowd, while I call him cautious? It is myself, for I have never annoyed you or forced myself upon you against your will. Now at every meeting of the assembly, as often as a discussion has arisen upon these subjects, you hear me accusing and convicting these men, declaring explicitly that they have taken money and have sold all the interests of the city, and not one of them has ever to this day contradicted the statement when he heard it, or opened his mouth, or shown himself. What then is the reason why the most offensive men in the city, the men with the loudest voices, are so cowed before me, the timidest of men, whose voice is no louder than any other? It is because truth is strong, while to them, on the other hand, the consciousness of having sold public interests is a source of weakness. It is this that stills away the boldness of these men, this that binds down their tongues and stops their mouths, chokes them and makes them silent. You remember, of course, how at the recent meeting in the Piraeus, when you would not have him for your representative, he was shouting that he would impeach me and indict me, and crying, "Oh, oh!" But such steps are the beginning of long and numerous trials and speeches, whereas the alternative was but to utter perhaps 2 or 3 words which even a slave purchased yesterday could have pronounced. Men of Athens, this is utterly atrocious. Demosthenes is accusing me here of crimes in which he himself was a partner. He says that I have taken money when he has taken money or shared it himself. But no such words, no such sound did he utter, nor did one of you hear him do so. He only uttered threats to a different effect. And why? Because he knew that he had done what he was charged with doing. He was abjectly afraid to use any such expressions. His resolution could not rise to them, but shrunk back, for it was in the grip of his conscience, whereas there was nothing to hinder him from uttering irrelevant abuse and slander. But here is the strongest proof of all, and it consists not in words, but in fact. For when I was anxious to do what it was right to do, namely, to make a second report to you, after serving a second time as ambassador, Aeschines came before the board of auditors with a number of witnesses, and forbade them to call me before the court, since I had rendered my account already, and was no longer liable to give it. The incident was extremely ridiculous. And what was the meaning of it? He had made his report with reference to the first embassy, against which no one brought any charge, and did not wish to go before the court again with regard to the second embassy, with reference to which he now appears before you, and within which all his crimes fell. But if I came before you twice, it became necessary for him also to appear again. And so he tried to prevent them from summoning me. But this action of his, men of Athens, plainly proves to you 2 things. First, that he had so condemned himself that none of you can now acquit him without impiety. And secondly, that he will not speak a word of truth about me. had he anything true to assert, he would have been found asserting it and accusing me then. He would certainly not have tried to prevent my being summoned. To prove the truth of what I say, to the clerk, call me the witnesses to the facts. But further, if he makes slanderous statements against me, which have nothing to do with the embassy, there are many good reasons for your refusing to listen to him. For I am not on my trial today, and when I have finished my speech, I have no further time allotted to me. What can such statements mean, except that he is bankrupt of legitimate arguments? For who that was on his trial and had any defence to make would prefer to accuse another? And consider also this further point, gentlemen of the jury. If I were on my trial, with the defendant Aeschines for accuser and Philip for judge, and if, being unable to disprove my guilt, I abused Aeschines and tried to sully his character, do you not think that Philip would be indignant at the very fact of a man abusing his benefactors in his own presence? Do not you then prove worse than Philip, but force Aeschines to defend himself against the charges which are the subject of the trial? To the clerk, read the deposition. The deposition is read. So, for my part, because I had nothing on my conscience, I felt it my duty to render an account and submit all the information that the laws required, while the defendant took the opposite view. How then can his conduct and mine have been the same? Or how can he possibly assert against me now things of which he has never even accused me before? It is surely impossible. And yet he will assert these things, and heaven knows it is natural enough. For you doubtless know well that ever since the human race began and trials were instituted, no one was ever convicted admitting his crime. They brazen it out, they deny it, they lie, they make up excuses, they take every means to escape paying the penalty. You must not let any of these devices mislead you today. Your judgment must be given upon the facts, in the light of your own knowledge. You must not attend to words, whether mine or his, still less to the witnesses whom he will have ready to testify anything, since he has Philip to pay his expenses. You will see how glibly they will give evidence for him. Nor must you care whether his voice is fine and loud, or whether mine is poor. For it is no trial of orators or of speeches that you have to hold today, if you are wise men. You have rather, in the name of a cause shamefully and terribly ruined, to thrust off the present disgrace on to the shoulders of the guilty, after a scrutiny of those results which are known to you all. And these results, which you know and do not require us to tell you of, what are they? If the consequences of the peace have been all that they promised you, if you admit that you were so filled with an unmanly cowardice that, though the enemy was not in your land, though you were not blockaded by sea, though your city was menaced by no other danger whatever, though, on the contrary, the price of corn was low, and you were in other respects as well off as you are today, though you knew beforehand on the information of these men that your allies were about to be ruined and Thebes to become powerful, that Philip was about to occupy the Thracian strongholds and to establish a basis of operations against you in Euboea, and that all that has now happened was about to come to pass, you nevertheless made peace cheerfully. If that is so, then acquit Aeschines, and do not add perjury to all your disgrace. For in that case he is guilty of no crime against you. It is I that I am mad and brain-sick to accuse him now. But if what they told you was altogether the reverse of this, if it was a tale of great generosity, of Philip's love for Athens, of his intentions to save the Phocians, to check the insolence of the Thebans, And beside all this, if he obtained the peace, to confer on you benefits that would more than compensate for Amphipolis, and to restore you Euboea and Oropus, if, I say, they stated and promised all this, and have now totally deceived and cheated you, and have all but robbed you of Attica itself, then condemn him, and do not, in addition to all the outrages, I know not what other word to use, that you have suffered, carry with you to your homes, through upholding their corruption, the curse and the guilt of perjury. End of section 16.